You're 8 years old, standing in the kitchen doorway watching your mom cry into a dish towel because the bills didn't add up again. Nobody tells you what to do. Nobody has to. Something in you just knows. You walk over, you hug her, you say, "It's okay, Mom, I'll be good." And in that single moment, a switch flips inside your nervous system that will never fully flip back. You just became the parent. Not officially, not on paper, but psychologically, from that point forward, you're the one managing the emotional weather in that house. And here's the part that should terrify you. You'll spend the next 20 years thinking that switch was a personality trait. You'll call it being mature for your age. You'll call it being the responsible one. What you won't call it, because nobody ever tells you, is a trauma response with a name. Psychologists call it parentification. And today we're going to dismantle exactly how it rewires a child's brain, how it quietly runs your adult life without your permission. And stick around for this one. The single reframe therapists say actually reverses it because it's not what most people think. Here's what's happening under the surface. A child's nervous system is built for one job to be taken care of. When that gets flipped, when the child becomes the caretaker, instead, the brain doesn't file that as unfair. It files it as survival. And survival brains do one thing extremely well. They stay alert. That's where hypervigilance comes in. You start reading rooms before you even walk into them. You clock a slammed cupboard door and know instantly whether tonight is a good night or a bad one. This skill feels like intuition. It isn't. It's a smoke detector that never turns off because it was installed too early by a house that was actually on fire. But here's the thing. Nobody tells you. That smoke detector doesn't know the fire is over. It just keeps ringing in your job, in your relationships, in rooms that are completely boringly safe. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because the child doesn't just develop skills, they develop a whole identity to survive on. Psychologists call it the false self, the version of you built to be needed, not the version of you that simply exists. You become the fixer, the quiet one, the one who never has a bad day, because whose job would it be to manage that? Imagine two kids in the exact same house. One gets held when she cries. She grows up trusting that her needs are allowed to exist. The other learns to swallow her tears before anyone notices, because someone else's crisis always outranks hers. Same house, same street, two completely different nervous systems built from two completely different unspoken rules. That second kid becomes the adult who apologizes for having feelings. Sound familiar? There's another piece of this most people miss entirely, the Zeigarnik effect. It's the reason unfinished business haunts your brain louder than finished business ever could. For most people, that shows up as an unanswered text nagging at them all afternoon. For a parentified kid, it shows up as an entire childhood. An apology that never came, a thank you that never arrived, a parent who never once asked, "Are you okay?" Your brain doesn't file that as the past. It files it as open, unresolved, still waiting to be closed. And a mind that's still waiting will quietly sabotage the present to keep chasing closure it was never given. Because here's what it looks like 20 years later. You're hyper-independent, not because you don't need help, but because needing help once meant nobody was coming. So why ask? You feel a strange flicker of guilt when things are going well, because your body was trained to expect the other shoe. Psychologists call this foreboding joy. Happiness feels unsafe, so you brace instead of enjoy. You overfunction in relationships, managing everyone's emotions but your own, and then wonder, quietly, resentfully, why nobody ever manages yours. You struggle to sit still because rest was never modeled as safe. It was modeled as something you earned only after everyone else's needs were handled first. You might even find yourself, without meaning to, choosing partners who need saving, because being needed feels more familiar than being loved. It's not that you enjoy the chaos, it's that calm, real calm feels suspiciously like the quiet before something goes wrong. And that's not a flaw in your character. That's the architecture that once kept you alive. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. The one that actually starts to undo all of this. You cannot out-achieve this wound. You cannot fix, perform, or overfunction your way out of it, because the wound was never about competence. It was about a child who needed to be held and instead learned to hold everyone else. The way back in isn't trying harder, it's going backward, deliberately, on purpose, and giving that 8-year-old in the kitchen doorway the thing she actually needed. Not a lesson, not a strategy, just someone saying, "You shouldn't have had to do that. You were just a kid." Therapists call this reparenting, and it feels almost embarrassingly simple. You sit with the memory, you speak to that version of yourself directly, and you say the sentence nobody said at the time. That sentence does something a decade of overachieving never could. It tells your nervous system the emergency is over. This isn't a one-time fix. It's a practice. Every time the old pattern fires, every time you feel that urged to fix, to manage, to perform, you pause and ask one question. What does the 8-year-old in this moment actually need? Sometimes it's rest, sometimes it's permission to say no. Sometimes it's just 5 minutes of doing absolutely nothing productive, on purpose, without guilt. Each time you answer that question honestly, the wiring loosens a little, not because you willed it away, but because you finally gave the alarm system proof that the house isn't burning anymore. So if any of this sounds like your childhood, here's the recap. Parentification rewires you to caretake before you can even walk. Hypervigilance keeps that wiring switched on long after the danger's gone. The false self earns you praise while quietly starving the real you underneath it. And the way out isn't becoming more capable, you already are. It's going back and finally being the adult that child needed all along. You didn't get a childhood, but you get to decide right now what happens next. If this hit something in you, stay a while. There's more of this kind of work here, and I think you're exactly where you need to be. Because the version of you who grew up too fast, she's not broken. She's just been waiting this whole time to finally be allowed to rest.